So I used to love story time videos, especially those of the work stories variety. I think kids who have never been employed before get this idea in their heads that a job is like this cool after-school hangout that you're paid to go to. Which it's not, and pretty much immediately after I started having jobs of my own, I lost a lot of interest in work stories content. Look, I'm already a wage cuck, I don't particularly need to hear about how other people are suffering to make minimum wage. But seeing as I have this YouTube channel and cartoon avatar now, why don't I take a stab at it? Yeah, there's no twist here, we're gonna do a completely by-the-numbers cartoon avatar story time video. Enjoy. Okay, so when I moved out for the first time, I could not afford the room that I was staying in. My only income at the time was student benefits, which wasn't enough to pay for the rent. And if you're wondering, how and why did I get myself into this situation? Well, I was so desperate to move out that I made fake payslips for a job that I didn't have to make it seem like I could afford the room. And then this actually ended up working, and I was living in a room that I didn't have the income to support. So for a couple months, I was burning through what little savings that I had, getting absolutely no callbacks from any jobs that I applied to. And things were starting to look pretty grim, until genius struck me. I figured if lying got me into this mess, then surely it could get me out. And so a Chinese restaurant nearby was looking for a kitchen hand, and when I was filling out the application form, I figured instead of telling the truth and saying I have absolutely no relevant experience at all, I decided to give myself, let's say, 2 years experience working as a kitchen hand. I submitted the application and I got a call back the same day. So I go to the interview and the boss is asking me some pretty standard questions like how close by I live, what my availability is like. It's all going totally fine until he asks me, so what was the name of the restaurant you used to work at? The restaurant I used to work at. You probably wouldn't know it. It was up in Sydney. We're in Sydney. Liverpool? Oh, Liverpool, huh? Yeah, my brother's son studies at the campus there. Maybe there's something to be said about going to some big, fancy university, but just because you've gone to a good university doesn't mean you're gonna have your whole life sorted out for you, and you know what, in fact, sometimes it's actually better for you to go to a smaller university, because it's things like that that keep you humble, and the most important thing
Yeah,
in life
man,
is
I
approaching everything
couldn't
with
agree
humble
more.
heart, but that's
No,
just
yeah, for sure, I totally...
And so somehow, after listening to the boss ramble about completely unrelated interpersonal drama, I ended up being hired on the spot. This would end up being the worst job I would ever have in my life. So at this job, I was paid less than minimum wage, I wasn't compensated for weekends or overtime, and there were many, many nights that I worked an hour or more of unpaid overtime. I didn't have any other coworkers, it was just me and my boss, and he would yell at me for anything and everything. Most of my time was spent washing up and putting clean stuff back where it belongs. So let's say I come across some random cup I've never seen before. You bet I'm getting yelled at if I ask where I should put it. Or let's say I put some plates away where they've always been put away. Well, now I'm in trouble because earlier that day, before I came into work, he decided he wants to start putting the plates in a different location. And I am, of course, completely incompetent for not magically being aware of this. The best days that I worked were Saturdays. Every Saturday, I would climb up on top of the stoves and I'd take the grease filter thingies outside of the range hood so that I could clean them. I used one of those high-pressure water hose things to spray them clean, but it would take quite a while to get one filter clean, and there were a few that I had to get through. Meaning I got to spend like an hour just standing outside where I was safe from being yelled at. I would savor that hour. I would take my sweet time making sure those filters were really clean. You know, except of course for that one Saturday that I came in, took down the grease filters, and then I got, you guessed it, yelled at because he didn't want them cleaned that day, and I should have intuited that, I guess. My lack of psychic ability was kind of a constant issue at this job. Anyway, this restaurant was dubious. I remember once the boss took these lobsters out of the freezer that had obviously been in there for a long time. I mean, these lobsters were freezer burnt to the point that they were more like blocks of ice that just happened to have lobsters inside of them. And then, when he served them to the customers, I heard him in the dining area bragging about how they were super fresh, just delivered this morning. Right. Super fresh. Also, all the ladles and other cooking utensils were all stored in this one big bucket of water that was only cleaned out at the end of the day. Meaning everything he used to cook with had been swimming around in a bucket of the whole day's filth. There's no way that's food safety compliant. So this one time I was finishing up cleaning the kitchen at the end of the night, and the boss was in his little office thingy scrolling Twitter on his phone. And I think he accidentally played a video that he didn't mean to play because a very, let's say sultry woman's voice started blasting through his phone speakers. And then panicked and quickly turned it off. I, of course, pretended to not even notice, but I'm pretty sure that he knew that I heard because the sheer awkward silence from him for the rest of the night was palpable. Okay, but seriously though, at this point in my life, I was a full-time student, I was adjusting to having to provide for myself for the first time, and having to deal with being chastised at work every night on top of all of that was a little bit like a nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. Eventually though, I was able to quit that job, which I did by not showing up and blocking my boss's phone number. My next job was at a McDonald's. So yeah, this wasn't a lot better, but at the very least, I was paid for overtime. In fact, during my orientation with the new employees, the manager showing us around was like, I hate it when people take their time at the end of their shifts. When your shift is over, you have to clock out immediately. To which I thought, huh, thanks for the tip. So what I'd do at the end of my shifts, I'd grab my bag, use the bathroom, wash my hands very carefully, maybe I'd chat a little in the break room, and then I'd clock off. Another thing that stuck out to me during the orientation was that they split us up by gender. They shared the guys around the back and the girls around the front because they just expected that the guys were working the grills and the girls were doing customer service. The longer you'd been at the store, the more likely it was that you would eventually be trained for both areas, but it seems you specifically had to show interest and they could just say no. Like, I remember this one guy I would work with who had been there way longer than me was constantly begging to be trained for the registers and they would just never do it. Anyway though, a lot like my last job, it wasn't so much the stuff you had to do that was that bad. Working in a kitchen is pretty straightforward. No, the problem is the way that you're treated. You're constantly being yelled at for things that are either completely out of your control or are straight up just the fault of the people yelling at you. Management would purposefully understaff the store to save money, and then you would be hearing about it because you're not doing a 2 to 3 person job on your own fast enough. And speaking of understaffing, I am reminded of a particularly bad occasion. So we were in a rush, and I think that day a bunch of people actually just didn't show up. Because the kitchen was basically being run by me and one other guy, which is not nearly enough people to manage a McDonald's kitchen in the middle of a rush. So it's very hectic, I'm having to do a lot of stuff that I haven't really been trained for, I'm very stressed. And then somebody orders 8 apple pies. Now, I know outside of Australia, McDonald's apple pies are usually just cooked in an oven, but in Australia, they're deep fried, and it is a huge pain. You have to individually load them one by one into a special fry basket. They take forever to cook, way longer than all of the other fried foods. And then when they're done, you have to handle the greasy, scalding hot apple pies and get them into the little boxes which get all slippery and hard to open with your greasy apple pie hands. It is incredibly time consuming. So 8 apple pies is kind of the last thing you want to see come up on your screen when you're handling the entire fried food section on your own in the middle of a rush. I think I ended up boxing 6 or 7 of the required 8 apple pies before I had to go do something else. So I'm doing something else, and a couple minutes later, the other guy in the kitchen with me is like, "Hey, did you ever finish those pies?" "Oh yeah, almost. I just need to..." All of the pies that I had boxed were gone. The girls at the front start freaking out like, "Where are the apple pies? We need the apple pies." Me and the other guy are looking underneath things, we're looking inside the bins, but those pies are gone. We didn't have enough pies left to fill the order, so I had to cook more again, which took forever. I assume the customer was really annoyed. But after that rush, I was seriously worried I was gonna end up losing my job. It really felt like everyone assumed that I stole the apple pies since I was the last one who saw them. And it seems the news of this pie incident made it pretty far up the McDonald's chain of command. Because eventually some other manager completely uninvolved in the initial pie incident came up to me and was like, "Hey, just so you know, we checked the cameras and actually one of the new employees snatched up all the pies and took them home on their way out." Which left me kind of at a loss for words, because that meant that somehow somebody was able to take all of the apple pies, which were basically right next to me without me even noticing. But whatever, at least my name is cleared and I'm not gonna get fired. Yet. So yeah, that McDonald's was pretty terrible. On top of the purposeful understaffing, people just not showing up was a constant issue. And then management would always struggle to find replacements because nobody wanted to work when they knew it was gonna be understaffed and chaotic. Oh, also, another fun fact about this McDonald's, we kept kitty litter and litter trays on hand, purely because the deep fryers had this issue where they would just constantly leak oil from the bottom. Anyhow, the thing that eventually was my undoing at this McDonald's was the fact that the managers would time your breaks really unfairly. Like, they'd send you on your 30-minute break immediately after you had your 15-minute break, which sounds like a weird thing to complain about, but they would do this regardless of how many hours you actually had left on your shift, meaning that you couldn't space your breaks out and rest properly. Which, if you're standing up all day, is something that you might want to be able to do. And after being fed up with this treatment, I may or may not have told the shift manager that he can go and himself, and that's how I got fired from McDonald's. But whatever, soon after that, I ended up needing to move to a different city in a completely different state, so I probably would have quit with no notice anyways. So when I arrived in Melbourne, a capital city full of opportunities, I figured that finding a janitorial position would be a piece of cake. Although I did make sure to enhance my resume, just to be sure. And pretty quickly, I ended up becoming the cleaner for a small shopping mall. So when I say the cleaner, I mean this place was cleaned once a day by one person, and that person was me. Meaning that if I slacked off, I was the one who had to pay for it the next day. But despite it all, I didn't hate this job. It was actually pretty chill. I could show up more or less whatever time I wanted after about 5 PM. Some nights I wouldn't get in till like 9. Nobody was around to bother me. If I finished early, I still got paid for the whole shift. So yeah, it was a pretty chill job, but there's really no cleaning job in the world that isn't going to leave you perplexed and infuriated by the incompetence of the general public. I mean, the amount of times that I saw just a whole meat pie abandoned on the ground directly next to a bin was just... it was too many times. Also, that whole idea that the men's bathrooms are dirtier than the women's, yeah, that's a total myth. To be fair, the bathrooms at work were employees only, so it wasn't too bad. But I'm telling you, every time I barely had to do anything in the men's room, it was pretty clean. But there was always something wrong in the women's bathrooms. It seems that somebody who worked in the building would just sit in one of the stalls and chain smoke all day. Most nights I'd come in and, yep, half-finished cigarettes and tobacco all over the ground, in the toilet bowl, cigarettes lodged in between the seat and the bowl. Why? And let's not forget the feminine hygiene products left in the toilet bowl. I know that you know these are non-flushable, so what are you doing? I really wish people would keep in mind when they're using public bathrooms that their mess doesn't magically disappear. Someone has to deal with it. The main entrance to the mall was this big roller door that you had to padlock from the outside. Hey, are you guys closed? You just watched me put a big padlock on the main entrance, but nah, yeah, we're actually open. Crap, I forgot to lock the back entrance. Hey, sorry, all the shops are closed and the front entrance is locked, so you can't walk through. You're gonna have to leave. That's okay, I just want to walk through. Huh? Hey, what the hell? Why is the front entrance locked? How am I supposed to walk through? Anyway, there was this one guy who worked at a mobile phone repair shop inside the mall. And one night he came up to me and asked if I wanted to clean at the school he goes to. And I said, and he gave me a piece of paper with a number on it to call. I call the number and some lady on the other end asks me if I'm responsible, and I say, and that was how I ended up with a second job. So I show up for my first day and it's immediately obvious that the building hasn't been cleaned in weeks, maybe months. There's this thick layer of dirt and dust settled over the top of the carpet. The bathrooms are looking like some kind of Silent Hill type of situation, and the whole place is just generally gross. The boss lady says something about how the last cleaner refused to come in anymore, and I thought, huh, that's a red flag. The building was pretty big. It was some kind of mechanic school. They had workshops with cars and stuff. And the agreement for this job was I would clean the whole building for a flat 100 Australian dollars. Meaning it was really only worth it for me to do about a 3-hour job. But the place was so filthy that on my first day I ended up working I think close to 5 hours. I figured whatever, next week it'll be way easier to clean and hopefully they'll give me a bit of extra cash for working so hard. I tell the boss lady I'm done and she says, you need to dust the plants. I'll do that next week. I really need you to dust the plants right now. Listen lady, I just worked way longer than what we agreed. I want my money now. Fine. So I figured after that little altercation I was not going to be hearing back from them, but the next week I get another phone call asking me if I'll come back in. And I stupidly agreed. So I think roughly for the next 6 months I cleaned for these people, and at some point during that they asked me to clean at their second campus, which I was shocked to discover was considerably worse than the first one. It was some kind of culinary school, but the kitchens were full of rusty old materials, there was trash lying around everywhere, mold on the walls, and people learned to cook in here. The funniest thing about both of these establishments though, in the main entrance they had this big printed out copy of their ABN, that's their Australian business number, which is literally just a number any random person can apply for and receive in a matter of minutes. But I think they did this because they were aware that they seemed very sketchy and they wanted to lend some kind of air of legitimacy to their operations. But I never saw any framed certificates stating that they're endorsed by the Department of Education or whatever. Like, I honestly don't know if these places actually had any real authority to give anyone certifications in anything. But yeah, anyway, these jobs just kind of seriously sucked. They were always asking me to do more work but not offering me any more pay, so eventually I just ghosted them. It was way too dirty a job for too little pay. Alright, intermission over, back to talking about the mall. So one night I came into work and the whole mall was filled with this mysterious white mist. I had no idea what the stuff was or if it was even safe for me to be breathing it in, so I called my boss. He comes in, takes a look around, and he concludes that he has no idea what it is. But by that point, the mist had mostly settled into a fine powder on the ground, so he helped me mop it up and he said he'd get back to me when he checks the cameras. And so the next day I get a text informing me that mere minutes before I came into work, a few kids sprayed a fire extinguisher through the mall and then they started sliding around on the ground. Now this is obviously hilarious, but my boss tells me he wants me to start coming in way earlier so that the mall isn't left unattended for so long. To which my reaction was, look, the main perk of this job is that I could come in whatever time I wanted, i.e. once all of the shops have already closed. If I start coming in early, I gotta say hi to all the shopkeepers and I risk interaction with the general public, which is simply beyond my job description. By that point, I'd been working there 6 days a week for about a year and a half, and the commute was really brutal, so I just kind of felt that it was time to move on. I was treated pretty well at that job, so it was the first time that I ever gave an employer my 2 weeks instead of just ghosting them. And that brings us to the present day, in which I do DoorDash on my electric bike. Since this video is getting kinda long, I'm gonna save that topic for its own video, but I will leave you with one parting thought on the matter of DoorDash. Do not wantonly stand over me without any space between us as I retrieve your food. There is truly nothing more abhorrent than a fully grown, middle-aged man making baby grabby hands at me as I open my thermal bag. Have some goddamn self-respect. But yeah, anyway, if you want part 2, subscribe and I'll try to make it as quickly as I can. Or if you want to hear more work stories from me right now, consider checking out my Patreon. I've been messing around making monthly videos on Patreon for a while now. A lot of it is hyper-specific nerdy stuff, but there's some room tour videos if you're into that kind of thing. And I think I've found a format that I like and I want to continue with on Patreon. Basically, we get a little tipsy, I set up my camera at my little desk and we make some jewelry and I just talk about whatever. Last month I shared some other funny stories from my sad little life, and this month we're basically doing the same thing except the stories are all the work stories that didn't make it into this video. The video is over an hour long, so if you want more work stories content, then check it out. And you can expect a similar kind of video once a month on there going forward. And I think that's it from me for now. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. Like, comment, subscribe, don't leave any negative comments or I will kill myself.